All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Burma Nation. This is lesson 10-2, day 2. We're talking about the quotient property of our whole radicals and square root stuff. So all we got to show you is this kind of information, and we'll make this one hopefully short and sweet and simple for you guys. So if I were to have a square root problem, and it was to be a fraction or division problem, so kind of like this one, it might have started with the whole thing being under 4 over 49, the whole thing being a square root. What that means, it turns into the top number being a square root and the bottom number being a square root. And then you just simplify both the top and the bottom. So this becomes the square root of 4 is 2, the square root of 49 is 7, and you're just done on that particular type of a problem. Now there's much more difficult things that are going to take place here, and I'll show you that stuff in just a second. So on this particular problem, where I have the square root of a 3n over a square root of an 8. In order to simplify this, we have a rule where we cannot have a square root on the bottom. Because neither one of these is a nice perfect square, we're going to multiply both the top and the bottom by a square root of 8 in order to rationalize this. So when I multiply those things, 8 times 8 makes a square root of 64 on the bottom. And then top times top over here makes a square root of 24n. Now we all know, hopefully, that the square root of 64 is just 8. So I could probably skip this step and just put an 8 down there. But now we're going to break up this 24n into something that's more nice. So that's more like what we did yesterday. So a 24 can be broken down into nice perfect squares. We could do a 4 and a 6. Now the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 6 is just something gross, so it stays at the square root of 6. So I have my n that was just a single n of the first that stays on the inside, and that 4 comes out as a 2. Now you might be thinking, hey Berman, I'm done with this, but no. Our numbers in front of the square root sign and the bottom number that does not have a square root attached to it can be simplified. So I can divide both those numbers by a 2 and leave me with a 6 square root of 6n over 4 as my final simplified answer. And that will be the process that you will be using hopefully most of the time. Now to make things harder yet, we have these other things called conjugates. So here is our next conjugate problem of us rationalizing the denominator. So anytime that there's math on the bottom with a square root, instead of us just multiplying by a square root 5, we're going to multiply by its conjugate. Now a conjugate would be the opposite of what you see. So a conjugate for this one will be 4 plus a square root of 5. So we are going to multiply both the top and the bottom by a 4 plus a square root of 5. Now we are doing this so that we can get rid of the square root on the bottom, but also be able to keep things, I guess, balanced would be a good terminology here. Now if you remember back to chapter, I'd say 7 or 8, somewhere in there, where we had things that were multiplied together and they were exact opposites for the second part, this was called a difference of squares. So these two things are going to end up having, if I were to FOIL, my first times first gets me a 4 to the second power. My last times last gets me a square root of 5 to the second power. And then my inners are going to end up canceling because a negative square root of 5 times 4 and a positive square root of 5 times 4 cancel each other out. So that's what's going to end up happening on my bottom. So what we will end up with is a 16 plus 5 on the bottom, because a square root of 5 to the second power is equal to just 5. And then that turns into being a 21. Now when we take care of our top, we're going to distribute. So that 2 gets multiplied to both items. So we get an 8 plus 2 root 5. Now, because these numbers aren't nice together to be able to simplify, this ends up just being our final answer. And that's what we're dealing with, folks. All right, this is the Berman Nation. We are signing off.